From the moment this story broke, it was clear this wasn't just another political dispute or routine clash between Congress and a former president. What we're witnessing right now is something far more revealing. I've spent enough years in politics to recognize stress when I see it. I've watched officials face investigations, endure public pressure, and answer uncomfortable questions. Most hold themselves together, even when the situation turns hostile. But what's unfolding with Donald Trump right now is different. This is not controlled defiance or calculated outrage. This is panic. This is what it looks like when someone realizes the margin for escape has vanished and accountability is no longer theoretical. Congress has issued a demand that Trump cannot dodge, cannot bury in rhetoric, and cannot delay without consequences. And his reaction has been explosive because he understands exactly what's at stake. Let me explain why this moment matters so much. Congress has formally demanded that Trump hand over a sweeping set of documents and communications tied to his actions after his criminal convictions and during his ongoing legal battles. This isn't symbolic oversight or partisan posturing. It's a focused, detailed demand rooted in evidence suggesting misconduct continued even after juries returned guilty verdicts. We're talking about financial records, showing how his legal defense has been funded, communications with foreign-linked individuals or entities while under indictment, internal messages relating to his public attacks on the justice system, and documentation that could point to witness intimidation after conviction. These aren't random requests. They are precise because investigators already know where to look. I've worked within government at every level, including dealing directly with congressional oversight. I understand the constitutional framework here. Congress has not only the authority but the responsibility to investigate potential wrongdoing, especially when it involves a convicted felon actively seeking the presidency. This authority isn't controversial, and it isn't new. It's foundational. Oversight exists to ensure no individual, regardless of status or popularity, is beyond scrutiny. What Congress is doing here falls squarely within that mandate. It's lawful, justified, and necessary. Trump's response tells you everything. Instead of measured legal resistance or structured compliance, he's spiraled into public outrage. His social media posts have become constant and increasingly erratic. He's lashing out at lawmakers by name, throwing insults, threatening lawsuits, and promising retaliation. Notice what he isn't doing. He isn't complying. He isn't calmly disputing the scope of the request through legal channels alone. That kind of reaction doesn't come from confidence. It comes from fear. It comes from someone who knows the documents, if released, would dismantle the carefully constructed narrative he's relied on for years. When I was in office and Congress demanded records from my administration, even when I believed the motives were political, I understood the process. I didn't always agree. And sometimes I challenged requests in court. But outright refusal paired with personal threats was never an option. That's not how constitutional government functions. Trump, however, has always believed the rules apply to everyone except him. He assumes that loyalty from supporters and sheer volume of outrage can overpower institutional authority. That strategy may work online, but it collapses when deadlines, subpoenas, and contempt powers come into play. This moment is especially critical because Trump is not facing these demands as a private citizen with a clean record. He's doing so as someone already convicted on 34 felony counts in New York, awaiting sentencing, and campaigning for the presidency. Congress has issued a firm deadline for compliance. Not a suggestion, not a negotiation, a deadline. And they've made it clear that failure to meet it will trigger consequences, including contempt charges, potential referrals to the Justice Department, and additional exposure for obstruction. Behind the scenes, Trump's legal team is in a state of crisis. They're trying to navigate an impossible situation, comply, and risk revealing evidence of further wrongdoing. Refuse, and invite new charges layered on top of existing convictions. The documents Congress is seeking reportedly contain material that ranges from ethically damning to legally explosive, all tied to actions taken after Trump was already found guilty. That timing matters because it suggests a pattern, not a mistake. Based on what's already known, it's not hard to understand why Trump is unraveling. There are strong indications these records may show coordination with questionable entities, while under federal indictment, unusual funding sources for enormous legal expenses, and communications that could amount to intimidation or obstruction. If even part of that is confirmed, it opens the door to new prosecutions. Trump knows this. He knows Congress wouldn't issue such a specific demand unless they already had substantial information pointing in this direction. And that's why he's trapped. Compliance exposes him. Resistance compounds his legal risk. Every angry post, every threat, every refusal only reinforces the perception that there's more he doesn't want the public to see. This isn't political theater anymore. It's a test of whether the rule of law still applies when the person under scrutiny refuses to acknowledge it. Since this demand was issued, Trump's public behavior has shifted from aggressive defiance to something far more erratic, and that shift is impossible to ignore. His statements are no longer focused on legal arguments or procedural objections. Instead, they're filled with sweeping accusations, claims of conspiracies, and personal attacks that grow more extreme by the day. He insists this is all part of a coordinated effort to destroy him, yet he never directly addresses the substance of what Congress is asking for. That omission matters. When someone is innocent and confident, they usually focus on facts. When someone is cornered, they attack the process, the people, and the institutions instead. To understand why this demand is so threatening to Trump, it's important to look at how congressional oversight actually works. Under the Constitution, Congress has broad authority to investigate potential wrongdoing, especially when it relates to public office, national security, or violations of federal law. This authority has been upheld repeatedly by the Supreme Court and exercised throughout American history. It's not optional, and it doesn't disappear because someone was once president or happens to be running for office again. Trump has never accepted that reality. He treats oversight as a personal insult rather than a constitutional obligation, and that mindset is driving his current breakdown. What makes this moment even more serious is that this isn't the work of a single committee acting in isolation. This demand reflects coordination across multiple committees, and in some cases, it includes support from members of both parties. In today's political climate, bipartisan agreement on anything is rare. The fact that lawmakers from different ideological backgrounds are aligned on this issue tells you how compelling the evidence already is. These committees aren't guessing. They've interviewed witnesses, reviewed preliminary materials, and mapped out timelines. The documents they are demanding are meant to confirm what they already strongly suspect. I've spoken privately with people who are familiar with the investigation, and what they describe is deeply troubling. They believe Trump has continued engaging in potentially criminal behavior even after his convictions, acting as though the verdicts didn't apply to him. According to them, the documents Congress is now seeking would serve as definitive proof, the final confirmation that misconduct didn't stop once the jury spoke. That explains why Trump isn't just denying the allegations. He's attempting to intimidate the investigators themselves. Look closely at how his reaction is manifesting. He's not simply disputing legal authority. He's personally targeting members of Congress, attacking their character, threatening consequences, and encouraging his supporters to harass them. This pattern is dangerous, and it's familiar. It mirrors behavior he's exhibited before when under pressure, but this time the stakes are higher because he's already a convicted felon. That context changes everything. This isn't speculative accountability. It's oversight aimed at someone with a proven record of criminal conduct. The Republican Party's response, or lack of one, is also telling. Many party leaders know what's happening. They see the meltdown. They understand that the congressional demand is legitimate and that Trump's behavior is undermining any claim that he's learned from past convictions. Yet most remain silent. They're paralyzed by fear of backlash from his base, worried about social media attacks or primary challenges. In doing so, they're choosing political survival over institutional integrity, and voters are noticing. One of the most critical elements of the congressional demand involves financial records connected to Trump's campaign operations and legal defense funds. These records could reveal whether improper or illegal sources have been used to cover massive legal costs. That includes potential foreign involvement, misuse of campaign donations, or promises made in exchange for financial support. Trump has spent decades fighting to keep his finances hidden. Even now, after conviction, he's gone to extraordinary lengths to avoid disclosure. That secrecy isn't accidental. Financial records have a way of cutting through rhetoric and exposing reality. Congress is also seeking communications between Trump and members of his legal team following his conviction. Normally, attorney-client privilege would protect those conversations. But there's a well-established exception known as the crime-fraud exception. If legal advice is used to facilitate or conceal new criminal activity, privilege no longer applies. Given Trump's conduct since his conviction, there's a strong possibility that some of these communications fall squarely within that exception. That prospect terrifies him, because it means even his most guarded conversations may become evidence. Of course, Trump's lawyers are preparing to fight this demand in court. That was always inevitable. They'll file emergency motions, appeal unfavorable rulings, and argue every possible technicality. But the reality is stark. The law is not on their side. Congressional oversight authority is clear, and the specificity of this demand, combined with credible evidence of ongoing misconduct, makes it extremely difficult to block. Delays may buy time, but they won't change the outcome. I remember my own experiences dealing with congressional investigations. They were often uncomfortable and frustrating. Sometimes I believed lawmakers were pushing too far. But I also knew that friction between branches of government is intentional. It's part of what keeps power in check. Trump has never accepted that principle. He's always viewed accountability as optional and oversight as persecution. That refusal to accept limits is now colliding head-on with constitutional reality. What truly sets this demand apart is its precision. Congress isn't asking broadly for anything relevant. They're requesting specific documents from specific time periods, involving specific individuals. That level of detail signals preparation. It tells you investigators already know what exists and where it's likely to be found. Trump understands this, which is why his response isn't strategic resistance, but raw panic. He knows compliance would expose him, and exposure would confirm that his legal troubles didn't end with conviction. What's happening now goes beyond legal maneuvering and enters the realm of psychological collapse. And that's important to recognize because it explains Trump's behavior more clearly than any legal brief ever could. If you watch his recent rallies or read his late-night posts, there's a noticeable change in tone. The bravado is still there on the surface, but beneath it runs a current of fear. His words jump from topic to topic, his accusations grow more scattered, and his anger feels less calculated and more desperate. This is not the posture of someone confident in his position. It's the reaction of someone who knows the situation is slipping out of his control. The timing of this congressional demand is not accidental. It arrives after Trump has already been convicted in New York, after multiple indictments in other jurisdictions, and after a steady accumulation of evidence, suggesting that the behavior leading to those convictions never truly stopped. Congress is not acting on a whim. Lawmakers don't issue demands this detailed unless they already have a strong factual foundation. They don't request specific communications from defined periods unless witnesses have described those communications or other records have pointed to their existence. Trump understands this, and that understanding is fueling his panic. At this point, Trump faces a no-win scenario entirely of his own making. If he refuses to comply with Congress, he risks contempt charges and additional allegations of obstruction layered on top of his existing convictions. If he complies, the documents could reveal new misconduct that opens the door to further prosecutions. Either path carries serious consequences. This is why his public statements have grown increasingly extreme. He's not trying to win an argument anymore. He's trying to intimidate institutions that cannot be intimidated. There's another element of this demand that Trump finds especially frightening: testimony. Congress isn't just asking for paperwork. They want Trump himself to appear and answer questions under oath about his conduct after his conviction. For someone like Trump, this is a nightmare scenario. He has spent his entire life avoiding situations where he must speak under penalty of perjury. And now, as a convicted felon, the stakes are even higher. One false statement under oath could trigger new charges almost instantly. Anyone who has watched Trump closely knows this is not a man capable of disciplined, truthful testimony. He contradicts himself frequently. He exaggerates, deflects, and improvises. Under oath, those habits become liabilities. His lawyers know this better than anyone. That's why they will fight relentlessly to prevent him from testifying. But Congress has the authority to compel testimony, and refusal brings its own set of consequences. Contempt of Congress is not symbolic. It carries real legal weight, especially when applied to someone with an existing criminal record. The legal risk doesn't stop there. Congress is also keenly aware of Trump's history with evidence handling. In previous cases, he has been found to conceal, alter, or attempt to destroy relevant materials. If he tries anything similar here, the consequences could be severe. Obstruction and evidence tampering are standalone crimes. Even the attempt to interfere with compliance could add years to any potential sentence. And in the modern digital world, deleting files or messages rarely erases them completely. Data leaves trails, backups exist, and forensic recovery is often possible. That's what makes Trump's situation even more precarious. Any move he makes to avoid compliance creates additional exposure. Every delay, every missing document, every unexplained gap raises new questions. Investigators are trained to notice patterns like that. Trump may believe he can outmaneuver the process the way he has in the past, but this time he's operating as someone already convicted, under far closer scrutiny than ever before. The political implications of this meltdown are significant as well. Trump is campaigning for the presidency while actively resisting lawful oversight and attacking the institutions responsible for enforcing it. Voters are watching him unravel over a legitimate demand from Congress. They're seeing behavior that suggests not remorse or reform, but continued defiance and instability. For his most devoted supporters, none of this will matter. Their loyalty is fixed. But elections aren't decided by unwavering bases alone. Independent voters and moderates are paying attention, and what they're seeing raises serious concerns. This episode also highlights a rare moment of cross-party alignment. In an era defined by polarization, the fact that some Republicans are willing to support this investigation speaks volumes. It suggests the evidence is too strong to ignore. These lawmakers understand the gravity of allowing a convicted felon to pursue the presidency while potentially engaging in further criminal conduct. Their participation underscores how serious this moment truly is. Trump's strategy, such as it is, appears to be delay. His legal team is likely hoping they can stall long enough to push any final resolution past the election. Maybe they believe a victory would allow him to shut everything down, or at least muddy the waters further. But Congress has made it clear they won't let this drag on indefinitely. They are prepared to enforce their demand, and they have tools to do so. As this unfolds, one thing becomes increasingly clear. Trump is not reacting this way because the demand is unfair or unlawful. He's reacting this way because it threatens to expose conduct that even he knows cannot withstand scrutiny. And that realization is driving everything we're seeing now, from the angry posts to the public outbursts to the increasingly erratic accusations. As this confrontation escalates, it's becoming clear that Trump's greatest fear isn't just legal punishment, but exposure itself. The documents Congress is demanding represent something he's spent his entire life trying to avoid: a complete, traceable record of his actions, decisions, and finances during a period when he was already a convicted criminal. This isn't about one isolated issue or a single questionable choice. It's about patterns, connections, and intent. Congress is essentially asking Trump to account for how he behaved after the justice system had already ruled against him, and that kind of scrutiny strips away the ability to hide behind slogans and distractions. One of the most revealing aspects of this demand is how comprehensive it is. Lawmakers are not limiting their focus to one narrow allegation. They want to see the full picture of Trump's conduct since his conviction, including financial transactions, internal communications, and interactions with people inside and outside the country. That breadth matters because misconduct rarely exists in isolation. Financial irregularities often connect to questionable communications. Political decisions often intersect with personal interests. By demanding everything at once, Congress is making it much harder for Trump to explain away individual pieces without confronting the broader narrative. The comparison to historical moments like Watergate is unavoidable, but there's an important difference here. When Congress demanded tapes from Nixon, the issue was whether evidence of wrongdoing existed. In Trump's case, wrongdoing has already been established by a jury. What Congress is now investigating is whether that conduct continued, evolved, or expanded even after conviction. That changes the moral and legal landscape entirely. This isn't about allegations alone. It's about whether someone who has already been found guilty continued to treat the law as optional. Trump's refusal to accept that reality is central to his unraveling. He still behaves as though outrage can substitute for compliance and as though personal attacks can neutralize institutional authority. But Congress is not a social media platform. It doesn't respond to volume or insults. It responds to law, procedure, and evidence. The more Trump lashes out, the more he reinforces the impression that he has something serious to hide. There's also the issue of witness cooperation. Congress has reason to believe that individuals connected to Trump have already provided testimony describing what these documents contain. That's another reason the demand is so specific. When investigators know the contents of communications before seeing the actual records, it's usually because witnesses have already described them in detail. Trump understands that, which is why his attacks have increasingly focused on anyone he believes might be cooperating. This kind of behavior only strengthens the case for oversight and raises additional concerns about intimidation. Behind closed doors, lawmakers are reportedly preparing for multiple scenarios. They are ready for partial compliance, delayed compliance, or outright refusal. In each case, there are enforcement mechanisms available. Contempt of Congress is not a theoretical concept. It's a real legal tool with a long history, even if it's rarely used today. And while jailing someone for contempt is uncommon, the possibility alone underscores how serious this standoff has become. Congress is signaling that it will not be deterred by Trump's status or his campaign. This moment is also forcing voters to confront an uncomfortable question. If someone cannot comply with lawful oversight as a private citizen, how can they be trusted with executive power again? Trump is asking for another term while actively resisting accountability. That contradiction is becoming harder to ignore. His behavior suggests not growth or reflection, but escalation. Instead of acknowledging past mistakes, he's doubling down on the same patterns that led to his convictions in the first place. The legal stakes continue to rise as well. Any attempt to delay, conceal, or manipulate evidence related to this demand could become a separate criminal issue. Trump's history makes this especially concerning. Investigators are undoubtedly watching closely for signs of interference. Every move he makes now is being evaluated not just politically, but for its legal implications. In this environment, even minor missteps can carry significant consequences. What we're witnessing is not just a clash between Congress and a former president. It's a test of whether the system still functions when someone refuses to acknowledge its authority. Trump's meltdown is not happening in a vacuum. It's happening because the usual escape routes are closing. Courts, investigators, and lawmakers are converging on the same conclusion, that transparency is unavoidable. As this process continues, the pressure will only intensify. Deadlines will approach. Court rulings will come down. Decisions will have to be made. Trump can continue to rage and deflect, but none of that changes the underlying reality. Congress wants these documents, and the law gives them the power to demand them. How Trump responds next may determine not just the outcome of this investigation, but the trajectory of his already fragile legal future. As this situation moves toward its inevitable conclusion, it's becoming increasingly clear that Trump's strategy is built almost entirely on delay and disruption. He and his legal team appear to be betting that if they can stall long enough, something external will change. Maybe the election reshapes the political landscape. Maybe public attention drifts elsewhere. Maybe procedural chaos buys him time. But time is the one thing Congress is no longer willing to give. Lawmakers have signaled very clearly that this demand will be enforced, and that message is what has pushed Trump from defiance into visible panic. There's a reason this congressional action feels different from previous investigations. This isn't about whether Trump did something wrong in the past. That question has already been answered by juries. This is about what he did after being convicted, how he behaved when the consequences became real, and whether he continued to operate as though the law simply didn't apply to him. Congress is essentially asking for proof of character under pressure, and Trump's public behavior alone has already provided part of the answer. What makes this moment so dangerous for Trump is that the documents being demanded don't exist in isolation. Financial records connect to communications, communications connect to decisions, decisions connect to actions. Once those pieces are placed together, it becomes very difficult to argue that misconduct was accidental or misunderstood. Patterns emerge, and patterns are what prosecutors and investigators rely on. Trump has always relied on fragmentation, keeping issues separated and confusing. This demand threatens to unify everything into a single, coherent narrative. His lawyers understand this, which is why their response has been so frantic. They're not just trying to protect their client from one outcome, they're trying to minimize cascading damage. Every disclosure creates new questions. Every revealed transaction leads to another inquiry. And once that process starts, it's almost impossible to contain. This is why Trump's legal team is fighting on every front at once, even when the arguments are weak. They're not trying to win outright. They're trying to slow the momentum. But momentum matters. Congress has already shown that it's prepared to escalate if necessary. Referrals, contempt proceedings, and further legal action are all on the table. The mere possibility that a former president and current candidate could face additional penalties for defying Congress would have been unthinkable years ago. Now, it's openly discussed. That shift alone tells you how much Trump's standing has changed. Power that once shielded him is now eroding. This moment also carries long-term consequences beyond Trump himself. It sets a precedent. If Congress backs down now, it sends a message that conviction does not end impunity, that resistance and outrage are enough to escape accountability. If Congress follows through, it reaffirms a core principle of democratic governance. No one is above the law, not even someone who once held the highest office in the country. That's what's really at stake here. And that's why this confrontation matters so deeply. Trump's reaction suggests he understands this on some level. His attacks are not just about self-preservation. They're about undermining trust in the process itself. If he can convince enough people that oversight is illegitimate, then the findings become easier to dismiss. But that strategy has limits, especially when evidence speaks louder than rhetoric. Documents don't care about loyalty. Records don't respond to threats. They simply show what happened. As deadlines approach and court challenges play out, the pressure on Trump will only increase. Silence will become conspicuous. Partial compliance will raise more questions than answers. Every move will be scrutinized. This is the cost of choosing confrontation over cooperation, especially after conviction. The system is designed to withstand resistance, and right now, it's being tested. In the end, this congressional demand is not just a legal event. It's a defining moment. It forces a clear choice between accountability and defiance, between transparency and concealment. Trump's meltdown suggests he knows which path leads to exposure, and that fear is driving everything we're seeing. The coming weeks will determine whether this episode becomes another footnote in a long list of controversies, or the moment when the consequences finally caught up to him in a way he could no longer escape.